And we do thank you so much for taking your time to join us live right here. This is www.techmake.tv. Our sincere apologies for a very bad start. We know we could have started very, very much more earlier, but we had some serious technical glitches that really took us long. But nevertheless, as you all can now see straight on our screen, we are so much excited and very much honored. This is the first time of our show. We are having this show called Taking Notes with Dr. Alex T. Magaisa. Dr. Magaisa, thank you so much for having us live right here.
No, you're most welcome, and thank you for having me.
Doctor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can hear you very
well. Thank
you
so much, and welcome to Taking Notes with Dr. Alex Magaisa.
No, you're most welcome. I can hear you very well.
Okay, great. I had to make sure that we can hear you loud and clear, and we're just going to be taking the next few seconds to build up on the traffic. But I think more importantly, to all our guests and all our viewers who are joining us live right now, today we're going to be catching up on what has been the most topical issues that have been happening here in Zimbabwe. So for the benefit of our viewers and to make people fully understand exactly what's going on and why we have this kind of a show, Taking Notes is going to be the first of our show where we need to have a listening ear as various media players. I know we usually give you a lot of news, a lot of issues and on 2 cents around matters. But now in today, we are saying, well, let's just give some few minutes and let's have a lending ear to people who have been closer to some of these developments, and let's get a third opinion as far as these issues are concerned. So that's why today we've got Dr. Alex T. Magaisa joining us live right here, where we need to decipher a lot of things. And to kick off this show, Dr. Magaisa, let's talk quickly on what has been happening, the pronouncements of the recent closure of EcoCash, Old Mutual Implied Rates, and of course, the banning of the stock exchange. To you, what is your take on this development, Doctor?
Well, it's very important to understand the political and economic issues surrounding such a development. We have to understand that Zimbabwe is going through a severe economic crisis. This is an economic crisis that has very deep political roots, and the challenges have affected all spheres of society. Virtually every layer of society is affected. So the banning of the mobile money payment systems came as a huge surprise last Friday to many people, because more than 90% of the country relies on mobile money payment systems. And of course, the banning of the stock exchange, trading of shares on the stock exchange, also came as a huge surprise. Maybe not to many people in the country, because probably not all people understand what goes on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, but it certainly has a huge impact on companies, on businesses, and it also has a huge impact on investors, in particular foreign investors who have holdings on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange will have been watching what's going on. And so both these developments are fundamental developments on the domestic marketplace as well as for the foreign market, which has interest in Zimbabwe.
Dr. Magaisa, it was always known that there have been issues as far as the stock exchange and the mobile money platforms are concerned. Why was it very important, or what necessitated this, should I say, rushed move? Because there hasn't been anything new that have been happening. We always knew stock exchange and mobile money players have always been operational. Now they've been blamed for driving or for pushing the inflation rates in Zimbabwe. What do you think could have necessitated this move, or in other words, why now?
Well, that's a very important question. I think it's an important question that everybody has been asking. Why now, compared to maybe 5-7 years ago. It's not as if these mobile money, providers have not been in existence for a long time. EcoCash has been in existence since 2011, if my dates are correct. The other systems have been there as well for quite a few years. And we didn't have these problems 7 years ago, for example, when Zimbabwe was using the multi-currency. But all of a sudden now you have, different accusations, the government making all sorts of claims about mobile money, providers, but also, the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange has been in existence for decades. But you have to understand that what we are seeing now is not new. Our Zimbabwean history, is replete with examples of similar behavior. And we only have to go back to 12 years ago, just over a decade ago. We had the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe banning bank transfers at some point, the RTGS system, which is essentially a payment system. We also had the same authorities banning the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. So Zimbabwe is like a horror movie, that you watched 10 years ago and you're watching it again. You're going through the same experience. These things are not new to us. It's unfortunate that our government doesn't seem to have learned from the errors of the past. They continue to make the same mistakes. You ask the question, why now? Like I said, Zimbabwe is going through a deep economic crisis. The government has to find someone to blame, and our government unfortunately tends to focus on scapegoats. Scapegoating is something they love to do, and on this occasion the scapegoat are the mobile money providers and the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. It could be anyone.
So, Dr. Magaisa, 21 November 2008, it's like we have gone way fast back again, exactly the same date. I know 21 November is a very popular date in Zimbabwe, but this is exactly the same date when the then Dr. Gideon, the then Governor Dr. Gideon Gono also closed stock exchange in Zimbabwe. And now we have first done a rewind, and we are exactly where we were in 2008, 21 November. Does these measures really help us as Zimbabweans? Do you think we are solving any problem by closing the stock exchange? And what does it mean to us as a nation? And do you think this could help us out to come of this situation? I need to understand the thinking. And do you think this can slow down the rates, long term, short term?
Yeah, well, you raise an important question. Do these measures solve the problem? Well, when you are dealing with a problem, you need to understand what the problem is. You need to do an investigation and identify the problem. You need to identify the source of that problem. And then you can find mechanisms. You can then prescribe solutions to that particular problem. Now, unfortunately, our government seems to believe that mobile money payment systems today is the EcoCash, the One Money, Telecash. It seems to believe that the market for shares, to put it in Shona, Musika, Wema shares, that this is the problem. That is not the problem. This is just a marketplace where things are sold. There is a reason. If you ask me, why are people buying shares so much? Why are companies buying shares so much? They are doing so because they no longer believe, they no longer trust in the Zimbabwe dollar. If there was foreign currency in abundance in Zimbabwe, people would simply buy foreign currency and keep it because it's a better store of value. But there is no foreign currency. So businesses have chosen to store their money in shares. So they go and buy shares in companies like Econet, companies like Old Mutual, companies like PPC, companies like Delta Beverages, companies that they believe in. So they go and buy shares. The good thing about having a share is that you can keep it there. Next year, it will probably have the same or similar value if it's a good company. So you are betting that it's better to keep your money in a share than to keep it in Zimbabwe dollars. Now, the government has said we are going to shut down the stock exchange so that there's no longer going to be any trading in shares. So, the market always finds ways. They always finds mechanisms to. Is creative. People are creative. So, 12 years ago, I remember one bank. I think it was Trust Bank. They went and bought bricks, lots of bricks. I think even bricks that were going to be manufactured in future. The reason was it's better for them. It was better for them to keep their wealth in bricks that they knew they could sell in future than to keep it in Zimbabwe dollars, which were losing value. So the point I'm trying to make here is that shutting down EcoCash or One Money or payment systems or the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, it doesn't solve the problem, because the problem is we have a weak and unstable currency which nobody trusts, which nobody believes in. And as long as that is the case, people are always going to find a way of running away, of converting that money into something that they can use. They will end up buying grain, they will probably buy maize. But you see, the problem with buying these things is that they're bulky. So you're going to have to pay money to store them. And the reason why it's good to have shares is that you don't have to pay for storage costs. Of course, you need to pay your stockbroker and so forth, but it's probably better than buying bulk things. You can't go and buy fish because fish will rot unless you have some refrigeration capacity. So you can go and buy chickens, but there's a risk that chickens might catch a disease and there might be a flood in the market. So, the market is always very creative. And I think for the first few days, we have seen people saying, oh, the rate is stabilizing or the rate is coming down or whatever. People are very myopic. They look at things in the short term. They don't realize that the problem that we have is deeper. We have a weak currency. We have no production in our country or little production in our country. But even the exports that we are having, we get a lot of money from exports. Imagine tobacco farmers. Imagine the gold that we export. The problem, though, is that is a misallocation of resources. So we get elites who are getting all this information, this money, which they then use for their own. I mean, you look at some of the profligacy that we see, people spending money on, luxury vehicles, on things that really have nothing to do with production. So, in my opinion, the government thinks it's doing a good job, but unfortunately, they are solving the symptoms. I could use a very colorful metaphor for this, but I don't think that is appropriate for the occasion that we have at the moment. But they are not solving the problem.
Some are already celebrating, saying that look, the rates that they're now going down after the closure of these various mobile platforms. How do you respond to this? Because it looks like they are probably frozen, or there's a hope now that the rates are coming down. Do you see this as an effect of the recent closure of these various platforms?
Well, whenever a measure is taken, the market has to study what's going on, find out how it can respond. That response is not always immediate. It's true. I'm told that those who trade on the black market are struggling to get what they call the float. They don't have the money, or they don't have sufficient funds to be able to carry out the trade there. So they have to pull their resources together. But like I said, it's only temporary. I gave you in my last answer an example that what happens is that whenever there is a policy, obviously it shocks the system. A lot of people were shocked by what happened, but it doesn't mean that the market is going to continue in this mode. It's a temporary setback for the black market, simply because they don't have access to the usual sources of funds. But they're big people. If you ask me, who drives the black market? The black market is driven by very big people. It's driven by big companies. It's driven by the government itself. It's a big player. The Reserve Bank itself. So I don't think that they are solving the problem. I'm not an economist, and obviously, I'm very careful how I analyze what they are doing. But I'm a Zimbabwean. I've been in the system. I understand how it works, and I see, how the markets have responded in the past. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we were in more or less the same situation that we are in now. They tried all these measures. They banned the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. They banned the RTG as the payment system. But it did not stop the collapse of the Zimbabwe dollar. It did not stop hyperinflation. So they are not solving the primary causes of where we are. And I think that those who are celebrating that the rates are going down, I think that is just a temporary position. Things will go back to where they were, because, as I said, the government is not confronting the problem. We will come perhaps to when you ask me what needs to be done, but like I said, they are not solving the problem.
Dr. Magaisa, let me just keep you around that issue. We seem to be having a lot of conflicting information, and some of the information is rather weird, or maybe should I say absurd. We've been having information that money supplies is risen way above what we've got actually here in our coffers, and now there's new information that probably mobile money players they're having unaccounted revenue and funds are circulating in the system. How far true can this be? And is it possible that these players are probably introducing new money supplies into the market that then needs to be contained or controlled via the legal systems or the systems that the banks can control themselves? I just need to understand this issue. How far true can that be? And who really is funding the money supply in Zimbabwe? Because we have a high money supply growth that we've been seeing lately. I just wanted to have your take on this issue.
Well, thank you. The institution that has the power to create money is the government, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and they have been creating money for quite a number of years now. They have done so in various ways. You can use examples of the amount of treasury bills that they were issuing, between 2015 and 2018. I think that Minister Mtuli, when he came, he tried to stop that process of rampant issuing of treasury bills, and I think that he deserves some credit for that. However, he obviously is a very small player within the broader game, and there are bigger political players who have other ideas. So we have seen Command Agriculture coming up again and again, even when the technocrats say that it's a bad idea. So that's one example. But we also have examples I've written in recent weeks about Zamco, a company which was created by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe to take over the debts that are owed to banks, but which have not been paid properly by the borrowers. They're called non-performing loans. Now, who paid for those debts? Zamco paid for those debts by the RBZ issuing treasury bills. So again, all these things created a huge rise in the domestic debt. And the government is the one that is in the process of creating money. So that is the biggest. They print money, they do all sorts of things that raise the level of money supply in the country. This idea of blaming mobile money providers, as I said, it's again a scapegoat. I'll tell you what I would do if I were a member of the government and a regulator. I would have the evidence. I would go out and pick the evidence that shows that EcoCash, One Money, Telecash, and the other mobile money providers are creating money. You don't make a bare assertion. You don't make a bold assertion that John is doing this without providing evidence that John actually has done it. So for me, it's actually embarrassing if I were one of those companies to be asked or to be told that you are creating money and then to have to prove that I'm not creating money. It is up to the government to prove that they are creating money. So far, I have seen nothing to demonstrate that they are creating money. So as far as I'm concerned, that argument is not valid unless and until the government provides evidence that they are creating money.
You mentioned a very important persona here in the name of Professor Tuli Ncube. Dr. Magaisa, we have been hearing a lot of statutory instruments, measures, and policy shifts and pronouncements. Some of them which are very much desperate, and they make strong attempts to try and turn around the economy. I'll put you on the spot there. How do you take some of these policies and some of the pronouncements coming from the finance minister? I know we've had a lot of them and a lot of various statutory instruments. The efforts, let's just put them all together and group them up together. How do you see these efforts towards turning around the economy, especially from his office as the Minister of Finance?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, Professor Mthuli Ncube came in with a lot of promise. A lot of people looked up to him. He had very impressive credentials from his work as an international civil servant as well as an academic. But I think some of us did warn at the time that it's not enough to have those credentials when you are coming into a political environment which is as toxic as the Zimbabwean environment, as well as a government which is renowned for its ineptitude and inability to implement policy. So you will have great ideas, but there will be no appetite for implementation. Professor Mthuli Ncube came in and people said, give him a chance. He asked to be given a chance. Unfortunately, I think I echo the sentiments of a lot of people when I say that he hasn't lived up to that promise. Whether that is because of his own weaknesses or because of the system in which he's working, that's a different matter altogether. But what we have seen over the past couple of years is that Zimbabwe has gone into a worse state than it was when Zimbabwe was, when the coup happened in November 2017. So I think a lot of people have been disappointed, but they've also been disappointed by the apparent arrogance of our authorities, the inability to accept wrongdoing, the clear, in some cases, blatant falsehoods, such as telling the rest of the world that Zimbabwe has a great health system when clearly we have a dysfunctional health system. I think that is dishonest. I think that is not fair on the people of Zimbabwe. Public officers should be honest and they should be candid as to the true state of affairs. But let me go to the issue that you asked, which is rule through statutory instruments. It's understandable that government at times might need to move quickly. So, for example, when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, it would have been necessary for the government to move in quickly to set up a law. It might be difficult to do so through parliament because it takes a long process. So you would need to have a statutory instrument. But you can't have statutory instruments as the primary mode or instrument of governance. And this is what we have seen for the past 3 years, perhaps even more than during the time of Mugabe. Because when things are done through a statutory instrument, they are just done by a minister. Parliament is not involved. Parliament only gets involved later. And so that is why people end up calling it as rule by executive decree. And this is not right because it takes away the idea of checks and balances that are necessary in a constitutional democracy. It takes away the role of parliament. And what we have seen so far is that we have statutory instrument after statutory instrument. In other words, a decree after a decree. But let me point out, as I conclude on this point, that it's okay that we have seen some statutory instruments and some directives which are actually done in terms of the law. We don't agree with them. we may be unhappy with them, but at least you can say they have been done in terms of the law. Now, if I go back to last Friday, the ban on the stock market and the ban on mobile money providers, it was not even done under a legal instrument. There was no statutory instrument. There was no directive. It was just a press statement by Secretary for Information, Nick Mangwana. It was just a rambling statement, a very long statement which read like a charge sheet, but it's not a legal instrument. And so for me, the most worrying aspect about this particular decree is that they did not even make an effort to couch it in a legal instrument. And we've read stories in the media. I don't know how far true they are, but Bloomberg told us that this directive did not involve anyone in the Ministry of Information of Economic Affairs, not anyone in the Reserve Bank. Indeed, we did see that they were not particularly involved in the process. They didn't comment for about 24 hours after the directive, after the press statement was issued. And there are suggestions that this was coming direct from the security services. Today, I was reading on Twitter, George Charamba, who is the spokesperson for the president. He has a Twitter handle, Jamwanda2. And the indication of that tweet was that, well, there's nothing odd, there's nothing wrong with security chiefs providing advice or directions regarding market-related issues, especially where they threaten national stability. So you can see that this whole thing is being couched as a threat to national security. And therefore, the intervention that we are seeing from the security sector as an intervention which is based on a desire or a need to protect national security. But I have raised a very fundamental question in my blog today, which is that if the security chiefs feel confident and feel justified to intervene on the basis that economic actors are threatening national security, what guarantee is there that they will not also intervene should they form the opinion that political actors are also threatening national security? So I did say, and I did advise, that those who watch Zimbabwe need to do so very carefully, because I think we are seeing the beginning of something that could be quite dramatic over the next, in the near future. I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so taking you back to the same point, we more or less saw the government through the Ministry of Information. We saw the RBZ doing a catch up where they to affirm and confirm the same position from the Ministry of Information, which naturally. Don't you think we should have seen the RBZ themselves spearheading this? This was more or less of an issue under their purview. This was a monetary issue. And even EcoCash and other mobile players, they were saying, well, we do not respond, neither can we act because of a press statement done by a different Minister of Information. And then we ended up seeing the RBZ doing a catch-up to say we affirm the position of ministry. Do you see a bit of disparity there between ministries? What do you suspect could have happened?
Well, in my opinion, what happened is that the regulatory authorities, as well as the economic officials, they were not part of this. I don't think that they were part of it. I've already explained, but I will repeat it for the sake of clarity, that this statement was issued by Secretary Nick Mangwana, who is part of the Information Ministry, which is essentially the propaganda ministry. Its job is to communicate political communications, to make political communications. And so it was a political message concerning a political measure. Usually, when you see regulated entities like EcoCash, like One Money, like Telecash, they are under the purview, under the regulatory remit of a regulator. And that regulator is the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. And that's why we have seen over the years that it is the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe which issues any directives, and it is the Ministry of Economic Finance and Economic Development which issues statutory instruments, because that is their mandate. That is what they are supposed to do. What we saw last week is fundamentally different, because this was coming from a source that is outside that economic sphere. My understanding is that these players in the economic sphere were not involved. As I say to you, there was a meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee, which is an important committee of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, which sat on the 26th of June, the same day that this directive or this ban was issued. But the Monetary Policy Committee did not say anything about mobile money payment systems. You would expect them, you would expect the regulator to be the one that issues a ban on this. Likewise with the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. You expect the responsible ministries, which is responsible for this area, to be the one taking the action, but they didn't. This was coming from a political communication. So it was a political communication as opposed to an economic communication, which raises the question as to why this was the case, why this is. And I've already pointed out that the news that we have been getting, and indeed the confirmations that we can imply from some of the information we are getting on social media from the government officials, suggests that this was coming from the security chiefs, and that the security chiefs had intervened on the basis that national security is being threatened by economic actors. And I said this is quite an ominous position, because it opens the gate for more interventions where the security chiefs believe that there are threats to national security. It could be political. They might say, for example, that the politicians have failed, that the politicians have become a threat to national security. Now, what will they do if they come to that conclusion? This is why I say it is very important for people to pay particular attention to what is happening in Zimbabwe and the developments that are taking place at the moment.
Dr. Magaisa, I know we should have been finishing off now, and today, unfortunately, we have to just stick around this issue of the mobile money. I will not be able to jump to other topics, but probably one of the last questions to you is, do you think that this could probably have been a national diversion, the way Zimbabweans are now speaking about this? There are some skeptics who are saying that, well, this was only done to try and change and shift focus from the actual issues that Zimbabweans should be talking about. What is your thought towards this?
Mm-hmm. Well, you are raising a very important question, and yes, I agree with the approach that we have taken, that we focus on this particular issue today. I think we have given it very good attention. We can talk about other issues in future. Now, going back to your question, well, I am one of those people who has argued that the government, or rather the ZANU-PF regime, is very good at shaping narratives, and it always does that. It's very good at shaping narratives because then we respond to those narratives. If you ask me, or if you ask most Zimbabweans, the biggest issue over the past 3-4 weeks has been about corruption. And the biggest issue about corruption has been hitting very close to the top of government, to the presidency. We have had the corruption around drugs, an issue that we were supposed to discuss today, but we'll discuss another time. We have had corruption involving judge investments, another entity which has close links, or of which people involved in those companies have very close connections to members of the president's family. We have had issues concerning the Minister of Health. Now, for the past 4 days, people are not talking about those things anymore. People are talking about mobile money. People are talking about the stock exchange. I've been talking about Zamco and the corruption that I believe has been taking place or took place at Zamco, which took over debts from these banks, especially from CBZ. And I have to say that this is an issue that I hope we'll find time to discuss in the future, because it's absolutely important for people to understand how public resources are used. Now, we are not talking about these issues anymore. We are talking about mobile money when we are talking about the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. So in a way, you could say that whoever are the strategists behind, they are very cunning in the way they're able to shape the national narrative, divert people's attention from these issues. But let me say this, those of us who have been talking about corruption are not going to stop talking about corruption. And I think people who have been discussing corruption, people who have been raising questions about corrupt activities of political elites in government should not stop doing so. They should always understand that having one issue as the most important issue in any given time doesn't mean that the other narratives should die. Those narratives should continue. They should remain on the table. And so, in a nutshell, yes, I agree that there is a bit of a cunningness there in trying to shape narratives by introducing issues, shocking the system, so that people stop discussing issues to do with corruption, unethical issues, and focus on these issues. But I think that people should be wiser and should not stop engaging, should not stop talking about issues that matter to them.
Okay, and we do thank you so much, Dr. Alex T. Magaisa. I know I've already taken you way after your time. It's 8:34 Zimbabwean time. I know it's around 7:34 there where you are. But we do appreciate and we do thank you so much for having these few minutes with us. Hopefully, next time we have enough time to make sure that we do expurgate and get into details of all these issues so that we help Zimbabweans fully understand what's going on with these issues. Your last words just before we shut this down.
Well, I would have wanted to start by paying tribute to a very important man in our political life. I didn't get the opportunity to do so, so let me do so as I finish. Dr. Joshua Nkomo, who was universally known as Father Zimbabwe. He is a very important man in our political life who suffered a lot in order for Zimbabwe to get independence, but also suffered a lot even after independence. And unfortunately, a lot of young Zimbabweans do not understand or do not learn or read the history of the country because some of these texts are not available to them. But some of us try to bring this information to the fore so that people understand their heroes. I think it's important for people to pay tribute to people like him. It's absolutely important to understand the moral lessons that he left for us as a nation, ethical lessons that he left for us as a nation. I should point out that one of the largest companies in Zimbabwe today, Econet, for it to get a license, for it to succeed to be where it is today, was thanks to the efforts of Dr. Joshua Nkomo, who opened the way when some people within the government of Zimbabwe were unwilling to grant it a license. But he stood by Mr. Strive Masiwa, by Econet, and now we have a company which is a world-class company in terms of size and quality, which does a lot of great things. And the entrepreneur, the entrepreneurs have come from that company and done very, very well. So I would like to say that Zimbabwe has huge potential. It has huge potential. There's huge talent. There's huge resources. The only problem that we have is that the leadership needs to do the right thing. We need the right leadership. We need the right brains. We need to be able to allocate resources fairly and properly across the country. We don't need this situation where we have only a few people, a small group of political elites and their associates being the only persons who have access to a majority of the resources. You don't need someone to be buying a car which is worth 200,000 pounds or even more when you can't even have a small school, when people are not able to have clean drinking water. It's immoral, it's unethical, it's disgusting. And I think that we need to improve as a people. And I put this as a challenge to our leaders to do much better. Thank you.
We do thank you so much, Dr. Alex T. Magaisa,